I take ownership for not being able to put points on the board. It all starts with me and ends with me.
But this Philadelphia loss is right there, in my opinion, because they had no business losing this ball game at all. And we gave them grace the entire season because of the talent. When you talk about the inefficiencies on the offensive side, we all felt like, well, they can get.
This wasn't just a playoff loss. This was a moment that exposed something much bigger. The Philadelphia Eagles didn't just get eliminated, they unraveled. At home, with everything set up in their favor, against a San Francisco 49.
I heard a lot of guys after they played the Philadelphia Eagles say, it's right there in front of you.
Jalen Hurts and A.J. Brown have clashed for several years. They had an off-the-field incident and personal clash that for a while I thought they had resolved, but it's one that I don't know if you ever quite get over it. I think they just don't like each other. I don't think they hate each other. I just think they don't like each other.
Niners roster that was missing stars, depth, and answers. And somehow, the Eagles still found a way to lose. But here's the part that has the entire league spiraling. It wasn't the interceptions. It wasn't the dropped passes. It wasn't even the embarrassing 19 points scored with one of the most expensive offenses in football. It was what happened after. When Jalen Hurts stepped to the podium, everyone expected fire, accountability, somebody finally saying the quiet part out loud. Instead, they got something else entirely. Calm, controlled, polished. Hurts took every ounce of blame and refused to point fingers at anyone, the coaches, the scheme, the receivers, the sideline chaos. On the surface, it sounded like leadership, franchise quarterback energy, protecting the locker room, keeping things in-house. But the reaction online tells you something deeper was felt. Because while Hurts was falling on the sword, the real problems in Philadelphia were quietly being brushed aside. The predictable offense, the coaching misalignment, the visible tension with A.J. Brown, the moments that decided the game and weren't on the quarterback at all. That's why this press conference mattered more than any throw he made. This isn't about one bad game. It's about whether leadership means shielding dysfunction or confronting it, whether taking all the blame is noble or dangerous. And right now, Eagles fans are split down the middle. Because the question isn't whether Jalen Hurts is a leader. It's whether he's protecting the team or protecting the problem. This loss didn't happen because the Eagles were overmatched. That's what makes it so unsettling. The Philadelphia Eagles walked into this game with every advantage you could ask for. Home field, a roster stacked with Pro Bowl talent, extra rest, and a San Francisco 49ers opponent that was limping into the playoffs, missing cornerstone players on both sides of the ball. This wasn't some unstoppable juggernaut. No Nick Bosa. No Fred Warner. Key contributors either out or limited. Practice squad level depth filling critical snaps. And yet, Philadelphia still couldn't capitalize. That's the part that fans can't shake. Because all season long, the Eagles were given grace. When the offense looked clunky, people said it didn't matter, the talent would win out. When the scheme looked basic, people said execution would fix it. When things felt slightly off, the assumption was simple: they'll turn it on when it matters. This was the moment it was supposed to turn on. Instead, it collapsed. 19 points, at home, in a playoff game, with A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith, Saquon Barkley, and one of the league's highest-paid offenses on the field. That's not bad luck. That's not variance. That's failure. The numbers tell the story in a way emotion can't explain away. Barely over 300 total yards, a lifeless second half, long stretches where the offense looked stuck in neutral while a depleted defense dictated terms. And the most damning part, the 49ers made mistakes too. Turnovers, short fields, opportunities handed right back to Philadelphia, and the Eagles still couldn't take advantage. 3 points off 2 interceptions. That's not playoff football. That's a team without answers. This is where the hidden by talent part becomes impossible to ignore. When a roster is this good, problems don't always show up in the regular season. You can survive inefficiency. You can mask predictability. You can lean on stars to bail you out. But the playoffs don't allow that. They expose structure. They expose preparation. They expose whether a team actually knows who it is. And in this game, the Eagles didn't just lose. They were exposed. Which is why what came next, the press conference, the deflection, the refusal to address the deeper issues, hit so hard. Because once the talent can't hide the cracks anymore, the truth demands to be addressed. And Philadelphia wasn't ready to do that yet. The game was bad. But the press conference is what broke everything open. When Jalen Hurts walked up to the podium, the room felt heavy. Everyone knew this wasn't just another playoff loss. This was a collapse, the kind that forces honesty, the kind that usually comes with pointed answers, uncomfortable pauses, and at least one hard truth slipping out. Instead, Hurts gave the cleanest response possible. He took all the blame. Not some of it, not most of it, all of it. He said it started with him and ended with him. He talked about growth, about learning, about the team needing to be better together. No names, no specifics, no acknowledgement of the obvious problems that had been boiling all season. At first, that sounded like leadership. A franchise quarterback protecting his guys, keeping the locker room intact, refusing to throw anyone under the bus in the most emotional moment of the year. That's the kind of thing players respect. It plays well in clips. It earns praise in headlines. But the longer people listened, the more uncomfortable it became. Because the questions reporters were asking weren't random. They were trying to get to the real issues, the offensive coordinator, the scheme, the predictability defenses had openly mocked, the sideline tension, the disconnect that didn't just show up in this game, it had been there for months. And Hurts shut all of it down. Every answer circled back to the same place. We, us, it's on me. No follow-ups, no expansion, no daylight. That's when the tone shifted. Fans weren't angry because he accepted blame. They were frustrated because he accepted blame for things that clearly weren't his alone. Drops in critical moments, confusing play calls, long stretches where the offense looked unprepared for what the defense was doing. Those aren't quarterback-only problems. And by refusing to acknowledge them, Hurts didn't just protect his teammates. He protected the status quo. That's why this moment mattered more than any interception or stat line. It wasn't about what he said. It was about what he wouldn't say. In a league where accountability usually gets louder after failure, the silence felt intentional. And intentional silence sends a message. It tells the coaching staff they're safe. It tells struggling players they won't be challenged publicly. It tells the organization that hard conversations can wait. That's why this podium appearance hits so differently. Because when the collapse is this obvious and the response is this polished, people start asking a dangerous question. Is this leadership? Or is it avoidance dressed up as loyalty? And once that question enters the conversation, everything about this loss changes. This is where the debate stops being emotional and starts being factual. Because while Jalen Hurts was absorbing all the blame, the film was telling a very different story. This wasn't a quarterback meltdown, it was a system failure. All season long, opposing defenses said the same thing after playing the Philadelphia Eagles. The offense was simple, predictable. Everything happened right in front of them. There were no wrinkles, no counters, no moments where defenses looked confused or stressed. And in the playoffs, that finally caught up. The Eagles scored 19 points against a San Francisco 49ers defense that was missing multiple stars. That alone should have set off alarms, but it gets worse. In the second half, with the season on the line, Philadelphia managed barely over 100 total yards of offense. No rhythm, no urgency, no answers. That's not execution, that's design. Reporters tried to steer the conversation there. They asked about the offensive coordinator. They asked about play calling in critical moments. They asked whether this scheme still fits a roster loaded with elite skill players. And Hurts shut it all down. Every question met the same wall. It's on me. No mention of play design. No mention of adjustments. No mention of why nothing changed as the game slipped away. That silence matters. Because leadership isn't just about taking responsibility. It's about identifying problems so they can be fixed. And right now, the biggest problems in Philadelphia are being treated like they don't exist. The league isn't confused about this. Defensive players have openly said the Eagles were easy to prepare for. The lack of creativity wasn't a secret. It was discussed all year. But because the team kept winning, it never had to be confronted publicly. Until now. Playoff football strips away excuses. It forces you to answer hard questions fast. And when those questions aren't answered, the same issues come back again and again. That's the danger of what Hurts did at that podium. By refusing to acknowledge the scheme, he didn't just protect a coach. He delayed the reckoning. He allowed a broken system to hide behind his leadership. And that's why this loss feels heavier than most. Because everyone can see what's wrong, except the person with the most influence refusing to say it out loud. And once that happens, accountability doesn't disappear. It just gets postponed. Which brings us to the part that made this collapse impossible to ignore. The people on the field who did have chances to change the game, and didn't. This is where the conversation gets even more uncomfortable. Because while Jalen Hurts was taking full responsibility, some of the biggest moments of this game had nothing to do with him at all. They were execution failures, plain and simple. Critical downs, clean throws, balls hitting receivers in the hands and ending up on the turf. A third and manageable in the second half. The ball goes straight to A.J. Brown. Drop. Later, with momentum hanging in the balance, another pass to Devonta Smith. Both hands on it. Another drop. These weren't desperation heaves. These weren't contested miracles. These were routine plays that Pro Bowl receivers are paid to make. And they didn't. That's why fans are furious. Because those moments don't show up in speeches about growth or resilience. They show up on film, and they change games. While Hurts was being criticized for interceptions, both of which were strong defensive plays, the Eagles failed to capitalize on chances that were handed to them. But the frustration runs deeper than just this game. The tension between Hurts and Brown didn't start here. It's been visible all season. The body language, the sideline conversations, the frustration after missed targets, the sense that every catch is followed by a complaint about the ones that didn't come. That relationship doesn't look healthy. And when the head coach and his star receiver are openly arguing on the sideline in a playoff game, it's no longer a rumor or speculation. It's dysfunction playing out in real time. This wasn't a one-off meltdown. This was a season's worth of frustration, boiling over when the pressure peaked. And yet, none of it was addressed at the podium. The drops weren't mentioned. The sideline blow-up wasn't acknowledged. The chemistry questions were avoided entirely. Instead, Hurts wrapped everyone in the same blanket statement. It's on me. That's what's driving the divide among fans. Because while leadership often means protecting your teammates, it also means demanding more from them when it matters most. Accountability isn't public shamming, but it does require honesty. And the honest truth is this: elite receivers didn't make elite plays. A fractured relationship showed up when it couldn't be hidden. And a quarterback absorbed blame that didn't belong solely to him. Ignoring that doesn't fix it. It just guarantees that the same problems will resurface, louder, uglier, and harder to contain, the next time the lights are this bright. This is where the conversation finally stops being emotional and turns structural. Because once you strip away the drops, the frustration, and the post-game soundbites, you're left with one unavoidable question. Who actually failed Philadelphia when it mattered most? It's tempting to pin everything on the quarterback. That's how the NFL works. The face of the franchise takes the heat. But this game didn't collapse because Jalen Hurts panicked or lost control. It collapsed because the Eagles had no answers. Look at the contrast. On one sideline, Kyle Shanahan was adapting on the fly. He was missing stars, losing key players mid-game, and still found ways to stress the defense. Trick plays, formation changes, creative sequencing. He turned limitations into advantages. On the other sideline, the Philadelphia Eagles ran the same concepts they'd been running all season. Static looks, predictable timing, no counters when the defense sat on routes, no creativity when the run game stalled. When the first plan failed, there was no second plan waiting. That's not on the quarterback. Quarterbacks execute, coaches design, and in this game the design failed. 19 points in a home playoff game with that roster isn't just disappointing, it's damning. Especially when the opponent is missing elite defenders and still dictating terms. That tells you the problem wasn't effort or talent. It was preparation and adaptability. And this is where Hurts' press conference becomes even more controversial. By taking all the blame, he shielded the very people responsible for fixing the problem. The offensive coordinator didn't have to answer questions. The head coach didn't have to explain why adjustments never came. The system itself avoided scrutiny. That's why fans are split. Some see a quarterback being selfless. Others see a quarterback enabling the same coaching failures that have held this offense back for months. Both interpretations can be true at the same time, and that's what makes this moment so dangerous. Because franchises don't get stuck because they lack talent. They get stuck because they misidentify the problem. They mistake loyalty for leadership. They confuse unity with accountability. Right now, Philadelphia is at that crossroads. If this loss is treated as a quarterback issue, nothing meaningful changes. The same scheme returns. The same problems resurface. The same excuses get recycled. But if it's treated as a coaching failure, a philosophical mismatch between talent and design, then hard decisions have to be made. And those decisions can't be delayed forever. Because championship windows don't wait for comfort. They close while teams are still telling themselves everything is fine. This is where the argument stops being about football and starts being about psychology. Because what Jalen Hurts did at that podium can be interpreted in two completely different ways, and both interpretations are uncomfortable. On one side, it looks like leadership. He protected his teammates. He kept the locker room intact. He refused to let frustration turn into a public firing squad. That matters. NFL locker rooms are fragile after playoff losses. One careless quote can fracture relationships, poison trust, and create off-season chaos. Hurts understands that. He understands how quickly things can spiral when blame starts getting assigned publicly. In that sense, his approach was calculated, calm, and mature. But leadership doesn't exist in a vacuum. On the other side, what he did looks a lot like enabling. By taking all the blame, Hurts didn't just protect players, he removed pressure from the people who most needed it. Coaches who failed to adjust. A system that has been figured out for months. Skilled players who didn't make plays when the season was on the line. Those issues didn't disappear because the quarterback said the right things. They were just buried. That's where fans start to get uneasy. Because accountability isn't about humiliation, it's about honesty. And honesty sometimes requires saying this isn't working. saying we have to be better in specific areas, saying things have to change. Hurts didn't do that. He chose unity over truth. And while that might stabilize the locker room short term, it risks locking the franchise into denial long term. This is how teams get stuck. They mistake harmony for health. They confuse silence with strength. They protect feelings instead of fixing systems. Great leaders eventually do both. They shield their teammates and demand change behind closed doors. The question Philadelphia fans are asking right now is simple: has that second part actually happened? Because from the outside, all anyone saw was a quarterback absorbing blame for problems that weren't his alone. And when the most powerful voice in the room refuses to name the issue, it becomes easier for the organization to avoid hard decisions, easier to run it back, easier to tell themselves this was just a bad night instead of a structural failure. That's why this moment feels so heavy. Hurts may believe he's holding the team together, but there's a thin line between protecting the locker room and protecting dysfunction. And once that line gets crossed, loyalty stops being leadership and starts becoming a liability. Philadelphia is standing right on that line. What happens next will determine whether this was the calm before real change, or the moment the Eagles chose comfort over accountability. And franchises that choose comfort don't stay contenders for very long. This loss didn't just end a season, it set the tone for everything that comes next. Because now the Philadelphia Eagles are entering an offseason where the questions are louder than the answers, and none of them can be ignored. The roster is expensive. The expectations are championship level, and the margin for pretending everything is fine is officially gone. The easiest path would be to do nothing. Blame the loss on execution, talk about growth, emphasize leadership, run it back with the same staff, the same scheme, and the same internal dynamics. That's the comfortable choice. It avoids confrontation. It avoids difficult conversations. It avoids admitting that something fundamental isn't working. But comfort is how windows close. Because this wasn't a random failure. It was the culmination of patterns that showed up all season: predictable offense, limited adjustments, visible frustration, a passing game that never fully synced with the talent on the field. Those issues don't fix themselves just because a quarterback says the right things. That's why this offseason is going to get messy, whether the organization wants it to or not. The offensive coordinator can't hide anymore. The scheme is on trial. The relationship between Jalen Hurts and A.J. Brown will be dissected relentlessly. Every decision, every quote, every move will be interpreted as a signal of whether real change is coming or whether this was all just talk. And here's the key part. Hurts' press conference bought everyone time, but time is not a solution. Eventually, leadership has to move from words to action. That doesn't mean throwing teammates under the bus. It means demanding alignment. It means making sure the system fits the talent instead of forcing the talent to survive the system. Championship teams don't just survive adversity. They confront it. They identify what broke and they fix it quickly, even when it's uncomfortable. Right now, Philadelphia is at a crossroads. If they treat this as a quarterback problem, they'll waste another year. If they treat it as a coaching and structural problem, they might actually evolve. But evolution requires honesty, and honesty is the one thing this moment hasn't delivered yet. That's why fans are restless. Because everyone can feel it. This roster is too good to be this lifeless. This offense is too talented to be this predictable, and this quarterback is too smart to believe the blame truly rests on him alone. What happens next will tell us everything. Whether this press conference was the calm before real accountability, or the moment the Eagles chose to protect the image instead of fixing the reality. And in the NFL, that choice always shows up on the scoreboard. This is where everything comes together, and why this moment will linger far longer than a box score. The Philadelphia Eagles didn't lose because of one throw, one drop, or one bad call. They lost because the cracks that had been forming all season finally split open under playoff pressure. And instead of confronting those cracks, the organization was handed something far more comfortable, a perfectly polished answer. When Jalen stood at the podium and said it all started and ended with him, it sounded like leadership. It looked like maturity. It played well in clips, but leadership isn't just about absorbing blame. At some point, it's about directing it where it actually belongs. Because this wasn't a quarterback-only failure. This was an offense that couldn't adapt. A scheme defenses had solved months ago. A coaching staff outmaneuvered when it mattered most. Elite weapons failing to execute in elite moments. A visible disconnect with A.J. Brown that no amount of PR can smooth over. Those issues don't disappear because the franchise quarterback says the right thing. In fact, polished answers can be dangerous. They soothe outrage. They quiet questions. They give organizations permission to delay hard decisions. And in a league built on urgency, delay is how championship windows quietly slam shut. Hurts isn't wrong for protecting his teammates. That's part of being a leader. But leadership doesn't end at protection. It eventually requires confrontation, not publicly, not recklessly, but decisively. Because accountability without specificity is just image management. That's why fans are so divided right now. Some see a quarterback doing exactly what a leader should do. Others see a quarterback shielding a broken system from scrutiny. And the uncomfortable truth is that both interpretations can coexist. You can be loyal and still be part of the problem. You can be composed and still be enabling stagnation. The Eagles are at a fork in the road. They can take this loss at face value, run it back, and hope talent covers flaws again. Or they can accept that this collapse was a warning, not about effort, but about structure, alignment, and honesty. Because championships aren't lost in January. They're lost in the moments after, when teams decide whether to tell themselves the truth. Jalen chose unity at the podium. Now the organization has to choose accountability behind closed doors. And the next few months will tell us whether those polished answers were wisdom or the first step toward wasting a championship-caliber roster.